Hello and welcome to this open day at the Courtauld, in which we are going to be talking about collections-based teaching. There are two of us running the session. My name is Scott Nethersoul. I'm a reader in Italian Renaissance art, which basically means that I teach and conduct research in the field of the Italian Renaissance. My particular love is Florence in the 15th century. And I'm joined today by Izzy, who will introduce herself now.
Hi, I'm Izzy. So I've spent 3 years at the Courtauld. I am about to start my master's in global conceptualism. But over my time here, I have done many things, which I will touch on with you a little bit later. I'm excited to talk to you all.
So how this is going to work is I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, then I'm going to hand over to Izzy, and then there's going to be a chance for you to put your questions to the two of us. 25 years ago, I suspect long before many of you were even born, I was in the same situation that you are in at the moment, deciding where to study. And I ultimately chose to come to the Courtauld. And so although I now teach and conduct research here, I was also an undergraduate in this institution. And this means that, or I hope this means that I can speak to you from experience and with the conviction of having made the same choice that I hope you will make, rather than, if you like, as a pawn of a marketing department. One of the factors that really impressed me and that convinced me to come to the Courtauld was about the intimacy of the place, was the idea that you would be taught in small groups often, that the lecturer would know your name and that you would have direct interaction with your teacher. What equally encouraged me to come to the Courtauld was the lure of the gallery. I'm from South Africa, and it was the gallery really that persuaded me to uproot myself on one continent and go to another one, a decision that clearly was the right one. I've never looked back, and I'm still here, as it were. And that's quite enough about me, really. Before I talk particularly about teaching collections, I wanted to talk about, there's the opening slide, I should have started with that, about the forms of teaching that we do at the Courtauld. Our teaching is divided largely into lectures and seminars, and that collections-based teaching forms a subset, if you like, of seminar-based teaching. Lectures are, as you can see from my colleague Joe Apton here, in full stride, lecturing in front of a group of students, are delivered in a lecture theatre. They're an experience in which you sit largely passively in the audience and someone talks at you. There is occasionally interaction between the lecturer and the audience, but it's largely facilitated through questions at the end. Seminars, by contrast, are very different. This is really where small group teaching occurs. They're generally in groups of about 8, 9, 10, sometimes as many as 12, although we hope to keep them around about 8. And you sit around a table. There might be moments in which the teacher, the tutor, will provide information, there'll be a short lecture or exposition, but they largely are discursive. They're intended to encourage people to talk and discuss an issue together. So there might be an image on the screen that you would discuss. There might be a set of texts that you read in preparation for the class, which you would also then discuss. It's a far more intimate experience of learning, and it's one that draws on learning through doing, as it were, through discussion, through everyone confronting ideas together. And this is the most obvious advantage to seminar-based learning, that intimacy encourages you through experience to learn. It's in these small groups that we also teach in collections. Our teaching at the Courtauld is in galleries or with objects in our own gallery, and I'll come on to that in a second. And this always happens in small groups. If you think about it, you can only really be about 8 people around any painting at a given time. So our classes frequently involve visits to the major museums in London, such as the National Gallery, to Tate, to the British Museum, to the Victoria and Albert Museum, to the National Portrait Gallery, as well as to other smaller museums in and around the capital, or to some commercial premises. One of our first year courses, in fact, the so-called topic course that I'll come on to talk about in a second, is exclusively taught in museums or in front of buildings in and around London. In your third year at the Courtauld, in the final year of an undergraduate degree, there's also the possibility to take study trips abroad. This really depends on the nature of the course and whether or not the material that you're studying is located abroad, but we do frequently take our students for 2 or 3 days abroad. So in my case, I teach a third year course on manifestations of power in 15th century Florence. And because that course is so intimately tied to the fabric and the urban layout of Florence, as well, of course, as the works of art that are still in Florence, we tend to go to Florence for 2 or 3 days in the middle of the term, so that students can get, if they don't know the city, can get a sense of what it's like, what works of art are still there, and how they fit together in the actual space of the city. Of course, this is very dependent on us being able to travel, which has been rather difficult over the last year with COVID, but we're hoping that those restrictions are going to lift soon. There are very obvious benefits to learning both in a small group and to learning in front of works of art in galleries, particularly insofar as they encourage you to engage closely and to look at your object of study. And because you're in a small group, to engage personally in that experience. In other words, not just to sit passively in the back of a lecture hall, but to engage, discuss, bring your ideas about what you're looking at to the group. Now, I've spoken about collection-based teaching in and around London, but we also have our own collections of the Courtauld, which we use extensively for teaching. Again, this depends on the nature of the collection, whether or not they match with the courses that you're taking. But a lot of the medieval and Renaissance courses, as well as some of the 19th century courses, use the Courtauld collections a lot. So too does one of my colleagues, Suzanne Babai, who teaches on Islamic arts and the arts of Iran, who teaches closely around a wonderful Islamic metal bag that we have in the collection. We're about to reopen our revamped gallery, and this includes a specialist object study room in which students will be able to handle and look very closely at actual works of art, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. We also have a Princeton drawing study room with a large collection of Princeton drawings, in which again students can work and study works of art on paper. Now, as a student at the Courtauld, you will have free access to the Courtauld Gallery as a study resource. So in other words, both as a resource to be used on your actual courses and to be able to visit and study in your own time. The collection of the Courtauld Gallery stretches from the early Renaissance, from the 15th century, right way through to the 20th century, and has particular highlights in the unparalleled collection of Impressionist and post-Impressionist paintings. Now, as I just said, we're about to reopen this November the galleries after a major transformation project. This has involved opening up the great room, this huge exhibition space designed in the 18th century at the top of the building, which is going to contain such well-known and significant masterpieces as Manet's Bat, the Folie Bergère, Van Gogh's self-portrait, the Bandaged Air, and a very significant collection of paintings by Cézanne. But this isn't the only space in the gallery that's been transformed. There will be new galleries devoted to the medieval and early Renaissance collection, where I do a lot of my teaching, to 20th century art, to the Bloomsbury Group. There are also new exhibition spaces for our celebrated program of loan exhibitions and other smaller temporary spaces. The Courtauld Gallery isn't the only designated collection, if you like, for your study at the Courtauld. There are also specialist image libraries, the so-called Witt and Conway libraries, which are photographic libraries of over 3 million images of works of paintings, of sculpture, and of architecture, which you are free to consult as part of your study, and which are being digitized. I said too that there are object study rooms to facilitate study. Now, these actually fall into two categories. There's an object study room in the Courtauld Gallery that's currently being revamped at the moment, and there's a prints and drawings room. The Courtauld houses a significant collection of works of art on paper, a hugely significant one for Britain, with about 7,000 drawings and watercolors and about 26,000 prints, all in all ranging from the early Middle Ages, again from the 15th century, right the way through to the 20th century, with such famous works of art by Dürer, by Michelangelo. There's a particularly wonderful Michelangelo drawing of the Dream, which I use a lot for my own teaching, but also works by Rembrandt, by Turner, names that you will certainly have heard of. So if you were to use one of these spaces as a student, you'd make an appointment with the curator, and she would take one of the works of art, the drawings out, and put it on an easel in the study room for you to be able to consult, to study close up, and to examine. This might also happen with a group of drawings or prints that your lecturer would get together for a class. The object study room in the gallery works essentially in the same way, whereby you can make an appointment with the curator, but more likely your teacher would get some works out of store so that you could look at them together as part of your class. I, for example, very often with my students get together collections of Italian maiolica, which they can handle, they can look at, they can turn upside down, they can see the painting at close quarters on these 15th and 16th century vessels. Again, the benefits of this kind of study are huge. It transforms works of art from being images and books, something that's distant from you, that you only see as reproductions, into material, physical things that exist in spaces in front of you, things that have backs, things that turn over, things that you can engage with as physical objects and really come to know intimately. And again, as I've said earlier, the ability to study them in a small group means that your ideas, your thoughts about them can be voiced and they can be discussed together. So having spoken about small group teaching and collections-based teaching and how they fit together and how important they are to the ethos of the Courtauld and to what is very unique to a degree at the Courtauld, what I want to very briefly is outline the undergraduate degree and give you a sense of where it happens, hopefully a flavor of what that would be like. What you're seeing at the moment is, as I say, a very schematic understanding of the undergraduate degree. You'll see that in your first year, you take a lecture course that runs through 2 semesters called Foundations. This is supported by smaller discussion seminar classes, but it's largely a lecture course. But at the same time, you take 2 topic courses. And these are in small groups of about 8, and they are based around works of art that are in London. They are taught almost exclusively out on site, as it were. If they're about architecture, they're in front of buildings. If they're about painting, sculpture, they're taught in galleries. Now, to give you a sense of what some of these courses are like, in the next academic year, there are topic courses on the pre-Raphaelites, which will largely be taught, one imagines, in Tate Britain. There's a course on contemporary art in London collections, which will be taught in Tate and in some commercial art galleries. There is another course on modern women artists, which likewise will be taught in Tate and very smaller contemporary galleries around London. I'll be teaching a course on Italian Renaissance altarpieces because of the huge strength in London collections, and that will be taught in large part in the National Gallery, but partially in the V&A, and also partially using a wonderful painting by Botticelli in the Courtauld's own collections. In your second year, there are again 2 large lecture courses that you'll see on the screen at the moment, one physical histories and another one called critical museology. But despite the fact that these are lecture courses taught in a lecture hall, their very titles should give you a sense that these are about thinking about physical objects, thinking about their existence in spaces in museums. So although you'll be taught in lecture hall, this would encourage you to go out and to think both about the actual material presence of these objects in collections, but also about how they're displayed, how the institution that they're displayed in frames what you look at. In conjunction with these lecture courses, you will also take several smaller seminar courses again. These generic names, they're courses in one instances, and period and themes courses. The text and context courses are based around text, so it's again small group teaching, groups of 8 around a seminar table, and they might have titles such as artist writings from the 1960s, Renaissance theoretical writings, something I might teach, right? Writings from Alberti to Giorgio Vasari, if you like, or approaches to Van Eyck. Period or theme courses, which are seminar courses again, small groups, but which will nonetheless involve visits to collections if collections in London have significant holdings relating to the subject of that course, deal with a particular period in a particular place. So it might be something like Rococo to Revolution, which would be about the arts of France in the 18th century. Or it might be about a theme. It could be something like classicisms, which wouldn't be about a single place and a single time, but which would deal with a single theme approached from different places and different times. In your third year, there are no more sort of large lecture courses, but a whole series of seminar classes, all which are likely to involve visits and collection-based teaching. The apogee of the degree really are the 2 special options that you take in your third year, which are taught twice a week and are real deep dives into a particular period and a place, but often seen through a very particular lens. This is the type of course I was talking about earlier, where I take my students to Florence. But other examples of these types of courses that we'll be teaching over the next academic year include subjects such as art and identities in medieval Spain, art in the modern nation from medieval Islam to postmodern Iran, or Afro-queerness and the black body. Hopefully that gives you a sense of the diversity and the depth of these particular courses. At the same time, you also will take further period or theme courses of the same nature as ones that I've described to you in the second year, trying to encourage a breadth of learning throughout the undergraduate degree. This all culminates in the research that you do towards your dissertation. The very pinnacle of the undergraduate degree is the point at which you show us everything that you have learned, the skills that you've acquired across the 3 years. And this is also the very pinnacle of small group teaching, because in a sense it ceases to be a small group and is done one-on-one with your dissertation supervisor, with one person who is going to supervise and mentor you through the process of writing your dissertation. Now, I hope that's given you a flavor of what is so particular about small group teaching and about collection-based learning in the undergraduate degree at the Courtauld, and something which I think gives the Courtauld a very particular and distinctive, or gives the undergraduate degree at the Courtauld a very particular and distinctive flavor. I'm now going to hand over to Izzy to talk about her experience of it.
Okay, hello. So let me just move this along. So I'm going to talk to you guys quite briefly about the collections-based teaching I have had in my time at the Courtauld. Sorry, I'm trying to shift your slides. There we go. And how these are sort of shaped the studies that I've gone on to do and what I'm going to do now. I'm afraid I don't really have a lot of pictures because by and large, when you are doing collections-based teaching, you're not allowed to take pictures. So I've got a couple that I will just sort of talk over as fillers. They're just there for the aesthetics. So I will take you back to my first year, and the first course I ever did was called Chair. It sounds slightly crazy, and it was slightly crazy, but it was actually an incredibly interesting way to look at the evolution of design and the human body. So this entire course was taught in collections, different collections around London, which meant that we got to see how the chair as a social object functioned in different spaces, and indeed how it functioned as an art object in the space of the museum. So like Scott said, it's really recontextualizing objects when you bring yourself to them physically. So we saw a lot of chairs, obviously, in a lot of contexts. We went to the Science Museum, the Freud Museum to see Freud's actual chair, the V&A and the Wallace collection, to name a few. The Science Museum we went to see the electric chair, which is very interesting. Not what I expected, but there you go. So the fact that a few of these spaces, like the Science Museum and like the Freud Museum, aren't dedicated art historical spaces, really meant that we had to sort of broaden the parameters that we had set in our minds about art and what it is and what an art object could or should be. So we would even, on the way to these different spaces, we would be on the tube and we would sit and talk about the seats of the tube and their fabrics. I don't know if you know this, but each different line has a design of fabric that's like been designed with the colours of the line, if that makes sense. So like the Metropolitan District and Circle line has a pattern, the colours of those lines on. And I didn't know that before I had that conversation with my class on the way, I think it was to the Freud Museum. But there you go, things you know, the more you know. So this obviously went on to shape a lot of my academic work, this kind of readjusting of what you understand as art and how you experience it. I'm going on to study conceptual art this year, where the traditional art object is really a redundant concept. So there you go. So later that year, I studied post-war modernism. And again, all of my classes were in different collections. And we spent a lot of time in this sort of prints and drawings collection, so of the Tate specifically and of the V&A, and seeing these works and the preparations for works specifically, especially, which you really, really do get up close with and interact with. And I think the most resonant one for me still 3 years later was Duchamp's green box, so the notes for the bride stripped bare. If you know the work that I mean, it's a green box full of absolutely insane notes that make no sense and have no particular order. And so we got to interact with this body of work and sort of go through it and try and put these notes in some kind of order in your head, because you really can do that when you have these things in front of you. And yes, if you're familiar with the work, you do know that it doesn't have an order and you just get to sort of pick through it. And it's crazy because obviously now I'm going on to study Duchamp again, and I'm building on that initial contact that I had with the work. And so I think that's really important. So that was my first year where I had loads of collections-based teaching. Obviously, I was then by the pandemic, as many of us have been. But in my second year, there was another Philip picture, but there you are. That's what I wanted. These are a couple of pictures from the William Blake exhibition that happened when I was going into my second year, again, just on the cusp of before everything locked down. I was studying 18th century printmaking, and so this was obviously really excellent timing for this exhibition. Our course leader set us a challenge to write a review of it and really think about the way that the prints as objects, as works of paper, were being presented in this museum space and how prints can be exhibited in a museum collection. And having access to this show in London was so valuable because you could go as many times as you like. Tate Collective is a £5, and if you have an icon card, you can go for free. So having that freedom meant that each time you go, you would pick up something different, and you would pick up something new, which I really do think lends itself to an understanding of curating and how art as a physical object, especially here as works on paper, is exhibited, and how this can change its context, and how this reshapes the way that you engage with things. I think, what have I got left? Okay. So again, these are just some photographs that I took from the Barbican exhibition Into the Night. It was on last year again. You might recognize them. So it's actually not Louis Fuller, but you would be forgiven for thinking that it was. And I found this out when I later went on to study at the beginning of the next academic year, the history of performance art with Sarah Wilson, who I'm going on to study again with this year. So again, I think the fact that I'd seen this exhibition and I'd had the chance to experience these works and all of the preparatory sketches of loafers, costumes and things like that, it really did, I really continued to sort of reference back to the physical objects that I had been able to see in the work that I did in my third year still, and will continue to do for my master's. So I think that may well be all the pictures I've got. That's just another one from Into the Night, because that was a fantastic exhibition that I really, really enjoyed. But I think that's all I got. So should we head on to some questions?
Thank you so much, Izzy. Yes, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. What you can see are on the screen at the moment, how you can stay in touch with us. You have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everything on the screen, and our email addresses. If you have any particular questions for us, please pop them into the chat. So I have a first question, which says, when can I visit the Courtauld Gallery? The Courtauld Gallery is going to reopen to the public at the end of November. So after this huge 4 or 5 year process of revamping it. So do go at the end of November when it reopens. There will also be a visit to the Courtauld Gallery for offer holders that will be arranged in the spring. So if you are offered a place at the Courtauld, you will then be invited to visit the gallery in the spring. Are there any other questions? I can't believe we've answered all of them. Yes. I have a question about, if you study a language, how many hours per week would study it would be for the course of the Courtauld itself? I think this is a question about language provision. Languages are taken in your first year. We're in the process of slightly changing how languages are done, but Izzy, what was your experience of how much time you devoted to learning a language? What language did you do?
I studied French at LSE, which is where we do the courses. I believe we had 2 hours a week. And what they do is they sort of assess your language abilities, and in the specific language that you'd like to take when you get there. If you'd like to start something new, they're more than happy to put you on any kind of course. There are so many options. But I studied French and I went in at, I believe it was A-level equivalent, I think. And so I had 2 hours a week, which were all in the same session. So it was a 2-hour session, which I think is the best way to learn language, actually, to go in and intensively just speak it for a long time.
I hope that has answered your question. I have another question about, is there any accommodation in the first year? Yes, we do have halls at a place called Duchy House, and you can apply for that once you have an offer, even if places aren't necessarily guaranteed. I'm not sure, was that your experience? Were you in Duchy House?
I was in Duchy House, yeah.
Yes. I have another question here that's come up. I can scroll through them. It says, is there a rift between artists and art historians? Do they get on well? Or is there a bit of those who can and those who cannot? What an interesting question. I don't think there's a rift between art and art historians. Izzy might be better to answer working on contemporary art.
I've actually found that they want to talk to you. They do find, and so for my third year dissertation, I was working on a piece of contemporary art, and I reached out to an artist based in Tel Aviv, and I wanted to speak with her, and she was really, really willing to speak with me and had a lot of time for me. And yeah, I think people are absolutely willing to speak with art students. Artists are willing to speak with art history students because they know that we're going to write about them.
I should say that the artists I work on, from Donatello, Michelangelo, have been dead for 5 years.
You can't really say a lot.
That's it. I mean, some of the mid-16th century writers, such as Giorgio Vasari, were talking to artists and were artists themselves. So in that sense, historically, there wasn't necessarily that rift. A colleague of mine is just reminding me that we, going back to that earlier question about accommodation, that we will, we can also support you into other accommodation with the University of London, such as the halls that are offered by the University of London more broadly. Okay, going back down here, there's a question saying, are you at a disadvantage if you did not study the history of art at A levels? No.
Absolutely not. I didn't study art history at A level. Absolutely not.
We absolutely aren't. We're looking to see that you are visually sensitive, and not that you necessarily have this huge body of knowledge about art history already. That's what we've got to do, right? Provide you with that.
I think that's the beauty of the foundations course as well. It really does level that playing field. Like there's no room for you to feel disadvantaged because everybody is sort of starting on this same grounding. And I think that really does help you feel more comfortable with something.
Just to let you know, far more of our applicants haven't studied history of art before than have. So you are absolutely not at a disadvantage. Any other questions? Leave it just for a few more seconds to see if any more come through on the chat. Okay, well, I can see that further questions aren't coming through. What you should just have seen as an email address coming up if you do have further questions, which you can post them, and you can see the other ways in which you can keep in touch on the screen at the moment. It's been a real pleasure talking to you this morning, and I do hope you will apply to the Courtauld.
Absolutely. And if you did have any questions for me specifically, having studied and continuing to study here as a student, yeah, please do feel free to ask for my contact details for the UG admissions email. I'm sure they'll pass them on to you. This is me on video giving them explicit permission to do so.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.